Okay, sometimes the connection doesn't work very well, but anyway. We're in Sydney, at Martin Place actually, and I'm going to talk about an hour. Oopsie daisy, the wind is really bad. Yeah, just hold it. Oh no, that's alright. The wind. The wind is very bad here today. Okay, the wind is really strong here, so it's a bit difficult. With the chalk and with the equipment. I wrote this big book. I'm a teacher. Teresa Van Leeshard is my name. And I'm an Australian teacher for nearly 30 years, and I've been going in federal elections for nearly over 10 years. Some of you might have seen some media coverage about me or, you know, any videos from me. And I've been going in federal elections for over 10 years. I just wrote this big book recently called The Political Persecution of Women and Children World. And it's a global book, it's written for a global audience. And it's got 12 chapters, and it's all about the rights of the world's women and children. Not just Australia, but also it's about good men too. So there's a lot of information about good men. There's a lot of information in this book about the government people, the political people, the government people who've controlled everything for over 120 years in Australia. There's two parties which they put in the 1918 electoral law to control everything. So Australia is a very controlled nation. It's a very controlled nation, unfortunately. We don't have a Bill of Rights in the Constitution. We don't have certain rights. Anyway, the first speech I gave in Mildura was about the economy. And the second speech I gave was in Canberra. That was about the Constitution and the Governor-General's role. So my speeches for the next 6 months about promoting my excellent book, but also, because this is a federal election year, promoting a public campaign for the Australian people to vote for their Governor-General from a list of candidates, because that position is the most powerful position under the Constitution. From the beginning it should have been that the Australian people voted for that position, but they don't, and it's picked by corrupt politicians. There's also a federal executive council under the Constitution. The position of Prime Minister has never been written in the Constitution, and that's based on a Royal Commission report from 1986, which I have a textbook as a teacher. I use as a textbook, and I don't have that with me today, but I did speak about that in my last speech. So that position, because it's a federal election year, the Australian people need to be able to vote for their own Governor-General from a list of candidates, and it should have been like that from the start. There's lots of things that they do that they should have put in there from the start, and they didn't, because they don't care about you one bit. They just care about political power and government power, and they don't care at all. And we all know that. So today, what I was going to focus on is talking about social justice issues, and I've listed about 8 social justice issues that the political and government people have harmed the Australian people for over, 2 centuries, and that's been going on. Big problems with the way they use political power in this country, and it really needs to change. And those two parties, Liberal, Labor, they should be deregistered and banned from elections, as well as Greens and the Nationals. There's over 50 federally registered parties, and they're controlling everything for, over 100 years, and it's just really wrong. Before I talk about these 8 social justice issues, I'm going to talk about the petrol prices around Sydney. Now, I've come from South Australia through Mildura and then Canberra and then Sydney. And when I drive around Sydney and the outer suburbs, I see that the petrol prices are over $2 a litre. Petrol prices over $2 a litre. In other states, in Melbourne, they're usually around about $1.70 or something like that. But I've seen petrol prices here in Sydney and surrounding suburbs and towns of over $2 a litre, over $2.10 a litre. And import our oil and petroleum from, and we also produce crude oil like the Northwest Shelf, and there's a few petrol refinery production sites in Geelong and Brisbane, but we also mostly import. 85% of our refined petroleum, petrol and oil is imported from Asia or Asian nations, which is fine, but let's have a look at the costs. So a barrel of oil in today's market is $67 a barrel, and a barrel of oil is 159 litres. So 159 litres of a barrel of oil is 42 cents a litre. It's only 42 cents a litre. Now what they do when they refine petrol from oil, from crude oil, and they refine it to become petrol, they put it through a refinery, and 159 litres, which is a barrel of oil, translates to about 170 litres of petroleum, of refined petroleum for your car, for your vehicle. So 159 litres becomes 170 litres, so that's a cost of 39 cents a litre. We import petroleum and crude oil at 39 cents a litre and 39 cents a barrel and 49 cents, it translates to a litre, 39 cents a litre, 42 cents a litre from a $67 a barrel of oil, which is 159 litres. Now they're selling it at the petrol station for over $2 a litre. So when we import refined petroleum, because we import a lot, but about 85% of it is imported, and we also produce some oil, about 380,000 barrels of oil a day. 380,000 barrels of oil a day Australia produces itself in the Northwest Shelf. But they export it all over the world. They export it. There's only a couple of refineries that they're using here. We need to increase the production of oil and petroleum. And we need to increase the production of oil and petroleum for domestic supplies. It's okay that we import it, but it's not good to rely on the running of your car and trucks and buses and vehicles on imports, is it? So the problem is the politicians are allowing petrol stations to charge you over $2.10 a litre when it costs them 39 cents a litre to import that petrol, refined petrol, and 42 cents a litre to import crude oil. So you do the mathematics and work out that the profiting of the petrol stations is pretty big, and that's because they haven't put an economic cap, as I talked about in the speech earlier in Mildura about my economic speech. You have to make caps on telecommunications and electricity, gas, and petroleum has to be capped. So you have a cost of living law, and that law says that you're going to cap a whole range of costs, essential services like telecommunications, homeowner rates, gas, electricity, and petroleum, and all sorts of essential services that you need. It should be economically capped at cost-effective rates for you. So 39 cents a litre for refined petroleum, this is what we're importing it at, and 42 cents a litre for crude oil. That's notwithstanding, that doesn't include transport costs and processing costs and trucking costs and all that, because what they do, so they get sent to petrol terminals when they import this petroleum and crude oil, and particularly the petrol, it gets imported to petrol terminals in Australia, and then all that petrol gets trucked. It gets trucked directly from the petrol terminals to all the service stations, the petrol service stations across Australia, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of petrol stations. But those costs, if you go from 39 cents a litre at the cost, and you add, say, 3 times that much for the cost of transport and processing and shipping and all that transport, well, maybe 3 times the cost, they shouldn't be charging more than $1 a litre for petrol, okay? So I said in my economic vision, my political website, to have an economic cap, it should be starting at petrol and diesel, unleaded that's too high, and then you cap it and you assess how that goes, and then you even can lower it even more, given the mathematics of what they're actually charging. So you can't let them profit like that. You can't let them profit. If they don't want to supply petrol at those costs, and say, well, we're not going to supply petrol at $1 a litre. Okay, then the Commonwealth needs to take control of those petrol stations, and then they put them in a legal name of the Australian people legal name, and now the Australian people will own those petrol stations, and they will supply petrol to the Australian people at $1 a litre, or $1.20 a litre, or $1.30 a litre. But to start with, I'm proposing that it should be capped at $1.50 a litre, and then you can reduce it again and again to what's cost effective, because you shouldn't be making money out of essential services like gas, electricity, petroleum, homeowner rates, and all this sort of thing. And incidentally, you know, gas, the supply of gas, when you buy gas, the equivalent of a barrel of oil at $67 a barrel, gas is equivalent of that amount of gas is $4 a barrel of gas, natural gas. So natural gas in Australia, huge mining of natural gas energy, and that should be provided all across Australia, cheap as chips and cheaper than chips, cost effectively to Australia, because a barrel of oil is $67 a barrel, but the equivalent in gas is $4 a barrel. So how the hell can they charge you what they're charging? They're profiting, and you know, the politicians are letting them do it because they're useless. And their rubber stamp Governor General is useless as well, you know. If you don't know anything about economics, you should never ever become a politician, ever. And if you don't have good morals, you should never ever be a politician either. Don't be a politician and have bad morals, because you're going to be a bad leader and you're going to become corrupt. And I wrote about that in my book, all about the sort of morals that you have to have as a leader to make good decisions about a huge range of issues. Okay? And then if you don't know anything about economics, you should never ever go in an election or never become a politician, because a lot of these politicians know fuck all about economics. They know nothing about economics, and they make all these stupid decisions, and they fail to make proper decisions. They don't cap essential services. They don't control the banks. I talked a lot about the banks in the last video, in the one in Mildura, and they don't do anything to those banks. It's how criminal is that? They let those banks make multi-billion-dollar profits year in and year out, and that's the politicians' fault. That's their fault, because they allow it, and they allow it so that the public is oppressed, so that you're paying 3 or 4 times more in interest and fees and charges than you have to, because they are so bad and lazy and stupid with the economy that they've got to control the banks. They don't, and you've got to rule the banks with an iron rod, and you've got to have a banking law that says there's an economic cap on interest rates, an economic cap on what you can charge, fees and services and all that, and face-to-face banking and cash must remain. They want to create a cashless society, which is really dangerous, because everybody relies on cash. Tradies, church groups, community groups, market people, homeless people, buskers. So cash is essential. It's just evil to try to create a cashless society. Okay? And controlling the Reserve Bank as well. The Reserve Bank must be controlled by the politicians and the Governor General, so that they can have monetary policy. They have absolutely no monetary policy when they allow an independent group of people to say, control the Reserve Bank, so we're going to set the rates at whatever we want, and we will charge lending at whatever we want, and that is rubbish. That's just corrupt. They're like a mafia when they do that. That's like mafia stuff. Anyway, I'm going to talk about 8 other social justice issues. This stuff is really not easy to talk about, because I can tell you what, the political and government people in this country have been doing lots of things which is just a horror story, especially to people who don't have a job, or vulnerable people. They need to create jobs and housing and all this. One of the things, I've listed 8, so the first one I'm going to talk about is the stealing of people's children. What the hell is that about, stealing people's children? Now, if you're a bad parent, 99% of parents are good parents. They love their children, they look after their children. Even if they're poor, they still love their children, and they want to create a good life for their children. 99% of parents care about their children. But what the government does, it says they go and take people's children to terrorise the population and terrorise parents and families. And they go and do that to terrorise you, to say, we can terrorise your family and even steal, amen, and we can steal, oh, do you like my hat? I love Jesus. And warning, I may still talk about Jesus any time. Well, you know, that's pretty common. Okay, so anyway, what they do, they go and steal people's children. Now, they're not using criminal reasons, are they? Like a normal criminal case. If they say the parent is a bad parent, okay, what's the criminal charge? And all the paperwork I've seen over the last 10 years on parents that have had their children stolen, I'm not just talking about Aboriginal children, there's Aboriginal children, white children, Asian children, they've had their children stolen. It's because they terrorise these families. And they say, the parent's done something wrong, something criminal, like rape the child. Yeah, charge the parent, charge the man, throw him in prison, and put the child with the other parent or the family. But in all these cases I've seen, there's no allegations like that. Or if the parent has bashed a child, seriously bashed a child, you've got to charge the parent with some sort of criminal offence to say they did something criminal, so therefore they remove the adult from the situation that did that, charge them, and the child must stay with the family. But no, they haven't been doing that for 100 years. What they do is they go in and they say, any allegations, even trivial things, really trivial things, they will take that child, and that child sometimes gets killed or raped in a stranger's home. So what the hell is that? You can't take children of people and give it to strangers, and sometimes those children get sexually abused. I know a man who had a 2-year-old son, and his son was taken, and the son was 2 years old, and he got murdered by the foster parents. Now that happened in Australia, okay? So you've got to charge the parents with a criminal charge if it's that bad. Remove the parent, keep the child with the family, so that they're with the family. You can't give children to strangers, because if that child gets raped or killed, that is the fault of the government people and the people looking after that child. Now you can go and steal a car, or you can steal somebody's piece of furniture, or you can steal someone's a physical material item. You can steal a material item, even a house, but that is nothing compared to stealing someone's child. That is nothing. The police will go and jail people for stealing food at the shop. All these government people have been stealing people's children. That is worse. That is much worse than stealing any sort of material item, or even food or whatever, or a material item. It's bad enough to steal. You shouldn't steal. Stealing is wrong. Don't get the wrong idea from me. Stealing is bad and it's wrong, and people need to be working or studying and having a proper income so they don't steal. But if you steal someone's child, if you steal people's children, that is the worst type of stealing, the worst type of stealing that you could do, because that child is bonded under God Almighty and Jesus Christ of the New Testament to their parents. The parents brought that child into the world through the birth process and the procreation process, and that child has a spiritual and physical bond to the parents and to the family, and that's why God created the family unit. Okay? But then if you go in and make allegations without any criminal charge, you go and make allegations and you steal that child away, you rip that child away, and that child is crying and the parents are crying and they're fighting to get the child, and then that is just evil to do that to people, really evil. Okay? You can't do that to people. Sure, prosecute the parent if the parent's done something really criminal and bad, yes. But you can't steal that child away. You just can't. That has to stop. And I think that is sort of stopping a bit, because there's a lot of people waking up to that sort of thing. Alright, number 2, psychiatric practice. Don't get me started on that. Well, I'm going to have to. At chapter 5 of my brilliant work, okay, chapter 5, it's the practice of psychiatry is a killing machine. There's some journalists in Australia who quoted my views about that, okay, and that's fine. And it's a killing machine. In chapter 5, what I did is I called it a Holocaust. I called it, chapter 5, the Holocaust nature of psychiatric drugs, practices, laws, and history. Now, you've got to go back, if you want to understand something, a practice, you've got to go back to where it started, how it started, who started it, and all this sort of thing. The politicians' use of psychiatry is a Holocaust. It's absolutely horrific. Now, psychiatry started in 1808 in Germany. That's where it started. First psychiatrists, I've written about it in the book, and I took evidence, quoted evidence all over the world of doctors, lawyers, historians, professors, teachers, academics, authors, parents, victims, survivors, other dead people as well, legacies that they've left, and all sorts of people, especially in the United States and Europe and Australia and Asia. They also psychiatrically kill a lot of people as well. You know, and they turn the police and the judges into killers, and the psychiatrists are killers, and the politicians are, well, they put it in the law for over 200 years. Australia's been practicing this practice since 1811. That's the first building they created for it. But 1808 is when it started, and before that they were called alienists, these practitioners, and they were so-called doctors, but they just killed people with their practices. And I went through also 7 centuries is the oldest building I can find in the 1300s in the United Kingdom. They killed a lot of people in that building. All these buildings around there that used to be used as these psychiatric facilities, they killed a lot of people. And like, for example, I wrote about in my book Greylands in Western Australia. It's over 115 years old, and I worked out that they've killed, assaulted, tortured, and they've killed about 10,000 people in that building alone. It's a very dangerous practice, psychiatry, and it deserves to be abolished. It really has to be abolished. Forced drugging is very, very dangerous, and they kill a lot of people with those drugs. In fact, 8 million people a year they kill globally with those drugs, psychiatric drugs, and that's from a 2015 medical report in the United States. So I've got so many published literature about the killing nature of psychiatry. And in Australia, there was an Australian Bureau of Statistics report published in 2017, and it's a death data report. Okay? It's the Australian Bureau of Statistics, who are excellent researchers, and they put this report together, which is the only one of its kind. And I wrote extensively about that report in my book. Okay, and also you can get that on the internet, that report. Had 75,858 dead Australians in that report, and over a 13.5-month period only, and over 153,000 dead Australians in total. And in the report they said it was 49.4% of the total deaths in Australia were under the practice of psychiatry, and also prescription drugs. So pharmaceutical drugs can be very, very dangerous. And these directors of pharmaceutical drugs all over the world, they're making billions of dollars killing people, especially psychiatric drugs. They're very, very dangerous, and they kill people big time. When they force it in the law, and they violently force it, when you force something like that, an injection, and you enforce it, violently enforce it, they call it involuntary commitment, but that is another cushy word for violently forced. So they'll lock you up in a building violently under the law, even using the law for it. How bizarre, how absurd to use laws to forcibly lock people up and inject them with pharmaceutical drugs that are very dangerous. And we can resolve this issue in 5 minutes by saying, okay, Teresa, you know, if they're going to try and say, oh no, these drugs are safe and it's all safe, all right then, let's prove it. Let's lock up, if society locked up all the politicians and all the psychiatrists in their own buildings and injected them, the psychiatrists and the politicians, with their own killer psychiatric drugs, that's their own drugs, and they were injected with those drugs, they'd all be dead in a week. They'd be dead in a week or a month, or they'd be dead in 6 months or 12 months, and that will prove
once and for all that they're killing people, and we'll see how fast that gets abolished. But you know what? They really should be jailed, actually. They really should be jailed. And this is the police. What the hell are the police are helping politicians, psychiatrists kill people with these psychiatric injections, very, very dangerous injections and dangerous drugs. And if it was done to them, as I said, if it was forced on them and forced in their home, when they're forced to inject people in their home or in a government building, if it was done to the politicians and the psychiatrists, they'd all be dead in a week or a month or 6 months or a year, depending on how much they were injected with, what's the volume, what's the amount, what type of drugs, how many drugs, and that proves that there's a killing machine, right?
They did that, look into the forgotten 300.
They've forgotten 300, okay. In my book, I've listed government reports, media reports, research reports, academic reports, even reports from psychiatrists and doctors. You know, there's people in doctors in the United States and in Europe says they killed 500,000 elderly people over the age of 65 in Western nations with psychiatric drugs. That's the Dr. Bregan, Peter Bregan, and the other guy is in Denmark, Peter, his name's in my book, just slipped at me at the minute, but he's brilliant too, and a lot of these doctors are speaking out and saying, so-called doctors, and they're speaking out and saying how dangerous and toxic and dangerous psychiatric drugs are. So, as I said, the politicians, if it was done to you, if it was done to the psychiatrists, you'd all be dead within a period of time. And every government report and medical report throughout the world proves that they die, their victims die on average 20 to 25 years younger than the general population. That's because they're killing them with the drugs. It's no different to what Hitler did. In fact, Hitler used a lot of psychiatrists and doctors when he committed his genocide. And I've called it a Holocaust in my book. If you look at the last over 200 years since 1808, even before that they were killing people with the fake labels that they make. They just make up horrible words and horrible labels and it's all fake. The whole concept of mental illness and all that, it's all fake, it's all bullshit. You just use horrible words, horrible, disgusting, foul words, and I went through the origins of all these words. Where did these words come from? Who made up these words? I did a big linguistic analysis to prove it's all fake and rubbish and bullshit. They were literally used bad, degrading, horrible, defamatory words to kill you. That's it. That's what it comes down to, the practice of psychiatry. It's just horrific. Okay, there can be lots and lots said. Even the public has killed their own relative for that practice. You know, in my book I detailed in Sydney, being in Sydney now, in Sydney, there's when they put them in those buildings, and they had to build mass graves because their relatives wouldn't come up and pick up the bodies. They had a big mass grave of over 1,000 dead people in Sydney because the relatives would not come and pick up the bodies of the murdered people in the psychiatric buildings. And that's detailed in my book. That was written up by a journalist. Okay, so topic number 3, Aboriginal people. Now come on, I don't want to say too much about this, but I wrote a lot about it in my book. 235 years and you go to someone's nation across the country and all that and you systematically kill them, well that's genocidal factors right there, isn't it? They're only 3.2% of the population now, do you know that? Aboriginal people are only 3.2% of the population now. Where are they? They're being wiped out. And that's genocidal factors for 235 years. That's the political and government people. That's their fault as well. Okay? So you don't do that. You don't do that sort of thing. And that's why people didn't want that voice mostly. It's because they don't care. They don't give a shit. And you can't do that to people. You can't just wipe out 235 years of genocidal factors. It's okay. You've got to ask God forgiveness. Ask God and Jesus Christ in the New Testament for forgiveness for this sort of murder of people. We saw them 20 years ago. They were sitting around in their little groups and all that. Where are they now? As I said, 3.2% of the population. That's Aboriginal people. 3.2% of the population. That's all. That's it. And that's a systematic genocide. There's over 400 recorded massacres by the academics. The academics have recorded over 400 recorded massacres, and there's, lots of evidence, lots of books written, lots of academic work done about it. We all know it anyway. So big problem. You can't just do that to people and wipe it out like they did to the American Indians, and when they went into all these other nations and they just persecuted the people to steal all their resources. Steal the land and all that. And you can say, well, children don't want to hear about it, if you don't want to hear about it, okay, but it's happened. It's happened. And you've got to repent. The public has to repent over that. Okay, homelessness, number 4. Now, for about 50 years, we've seen homeless people, haven't we, in Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane and Perth and Adelaide, and homeless people, as far as I can remember, I'm in my 50s, but we've seen homeless people everywhere, and Sydney and Melbourne is bad. And this is because the politicians are too corrupt and criminal and lazy to build homes for people. I'm not talking about homes like government homes. I'm talking about private homes where they can use the banking system. If I was the Governor-General of Australia, I'd build 1 million homes in 3 years by using the Commonwealth Bank and the Reserve Bank and cap those homes at $250,000 in country towns in Australia, and build those houses in lots of 50 or 60 all across Australia, and let the bank can fund it. The bank! Give them a home loan of $250,000 capped at 2% if you control the Reserve Bank. A 1% variation in the Reserve Bank, 1% rate is a 2% home loan, right there, bank. And enforce that with a cap, with all the banks. No more profiting of the banks. And they should have done that 50 years ago. They don't care one bit. There's murder of the population, murder of the poor people. And they end up getting the police, and they just go around and they just fine them and jail them, and they get drugged under the psychiatric system. They just want to kill them off. It's all eugenics. Okay, and that's literally what has happened. So it's like, if they don't do the right thing, politicians, you don't be a politician ever if you're not going to have the right morals and do the right thing. And they should have been building houses all this time. And this big problem with inflation's bullshit. The cost of living's real, but inflation isn't. But the overinflated prices of housing, like $1 million to buy a house in the city now. And that should never have got like that with the geographical size of Australia and the population. It's only got 27 million people here. You only have 27 million people and got all this land, masses and masses and masses, endless land in the cities and the towns and all that. You've got a country town of 100 people or 500 people. That means you've got services, you can build houses there. So there's no excuses. No one ever should have been homeless in Australia, ever. And because the politicians are too corrupt and criminal and lazy and greedy to build houses for the Australian people, and that's why it happens. And the rich people, the billionaires, maybe the top 100 rich, top 1,000 rich people in Australia, they're to blame as well. Who needs $1 billion? If you're a billionaire, well, you're just a criminal. Who needs $1 billion? You don't need $1 billion. I don't care how good you think you are. A few $1 million, sure, you've got a few $1 million, okay, great. You don't need $100 million or $200 million or $300 million or $1 billion. Who needs $1 billion? How stupid and absurd is that? You're to blame for people not having a house. You're to blame for people not having a job. Greed. Greed will do it. Greed will cause all sorts of problems and injustices in Australian society, but all around the world as well. Okay, topic number 5, the transgender, issue, gender ideology. Again, blame politicians for putting that bullshit in the law to mutilate children. I mean, that's just sick. I wrote in my book about that, chapter 6. Okay? Chapter 6 is the largest chapter in my book, all about gender ideology. Go back to the history of it, who started it, how it started, who was involved, what did they do, how did they create all this rubbish. Male and female, come on. In nature, in humans and in animals and plants, they need a man and a woman to have a child, or an animal, a baby. And that's natural, man and woman, that's it. God created it that way, all through the Bible. God created man, God created woman, God created children, God created the plants, all the physical earth was created by God, and they come around, the devil comes along and starts mutilating children and saying, men can go in women's spaces and all these sports and prisons and rape shelters and all this bullshit, and say a man could be a woman. That's absolutely evil to do that, right? So that's the politicians' fault. I blame them. Sure, people are different in society. Everybody's got their own decisions and they make their own choices in life. You know, you want to serve Jesus or you want to serve the devil, okay? You can make your own choices in life. That doesn't bother me. But when they start putting evil stuff in the law and they force it in the school system, as a teacher myself, I worked as a teacher for 20 years in the high school system, and I've been a qualified and experienced teacher for nearly 30 years now. But when they start forcing this evil stuff in the schools, in the teaching program, the school system and all this, and they put it in the law and they force the judges to enforce it, and they use the law for corrupt and criminal purposes, that's just evil, right? And the way they actually create laws and use the law, the politicians mostly, is bad. So they brought in a law on the 7th of February 2025 for federal politicians. It's called the Hate Crimes Law. And that says if you promote violence towards particular groups or whatever, that can be a criminal offence. But nobody is promoting violence towards any of these groups. No one is doing that. People are speaking publicly about it all over the world, and they're trying to criminalise your speech and destroy free speech, and they want censorship. What sort of a bad politician has censorship laws? You're a bad politician if you censor the population, if you destroy free speech in any way whatsoever, because speaking publicly and in the law is very, very important, and everybody has to have a view. You might not agree with that view, that's fine, but you don't have to. Just speaking publicly is not violence. It isn't. It's a physical act. Okay, nobody is promoting violence towards any of these groups. Nobody is doing that. They're speaking publicly and they say, the politicians are to blame, putting this rubbish in the law and saying a man can pretend to be a woman and go into sports and spaces and all this, and that's bad. That's bad news because it's a big fat lie, isn't it? And then they have all these gender surgeons. In Australia, they have 35 gender surgeons, which I wrote about in my book. I named them on my book because it's all public information. I just got it from the internet. 35 gender surgeons in Australia. They're doing what Dr. Mengele did. I explained what Dr. Mengele did during the Second World War. He was a Nazi doctor who mutilated people and killed people. And these grotesque, I went through all these gender surgeries and I talked about what they were and what they did medically and all this and what they do. And they're just horror stories. To cut up the human body like that for no reason whatsoever, a subjective reason, and I proved that it's all evil and bad and gratuitous, horrible waste of public money and turning these doctors, these gender surgeons, into criminals. Who the hell would work as a doctor and carve up children's bodies? I've seen videos and footage of girls, teenagers, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old with their breasts cut off. That is completely criminal to do that to a girl or a woman, or surgically put a fake penis on a woman and all that. You might not disagree or agree or whatever, but you can't use doctors like that. You can't use doctors to carve up the human body and say that's acceptable. Morally, that's wrong. You can't corrupt people like that in the law. Corrupting the teachers, corrupting the doctors, corrupting the police, corrupting the judges, and that's what the politicians do when they do that. They think that political law is everything, but it isn't. Because God Almighty and Jesus Christ in the New Testament will judge every human in this world. Do you know there are 2.4 billion Christians in the world? There are 2.4 billion Christians in the world. But you know what? We are outnumbered 2-1 by the devil worshippers. Because if you're not a Christian, you're actually choosing the devil. So 2.4 billion Christians globally, and then everybody else chooses the devil. Because there's over 8 billion humans on earth. And believe me when I tell you that the Christian people of the world are outnumbered 2 to 1. And I wrote about that in my book as well, about the Christian faith and the teaching of the New Testament and how brilliant and powerful it is, except what Paul said about women is rubbish, and what Paul said about the government is rubbish as well. But I agree with 99% of it, and that's very powerful teaching. So basically, you've got to be a good leader. To be a good leader, you have to have good morals, and you should never work in the government unless you've got good morals. Never. Because you're going to be judged by God and Jesus more harshly than anyone else, including teachers, including doctors, including lawyers, including politicians, including police, and all these people. And you need to have, these people, they all need proper moral leadership. Okay? Proper moral leadership. And if they don't get it, they can do things to harm people, either knowingly or not knowingly, because, it's in the political war. Who cares about that? It's rubbish. Make decisions on the basis of morality. You make decisions on the basis of morals, whether you're a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer or a police officer or a politician or the Governor General must make decisions on the basis of good morality, and that's it. There are lots and lots of laws. Commonwealth laws, state laws, good laws, bad laws, but if you start enforcing bad laws, you're going to be a bad person and a bad leader, and you're going to do bad things to people, and that's what you'll be judged on. The good things that you do and the bad things that you do, and that is what every human in this world who ever lived for 2,000 years is going to be judged on.
That's right.
Okay.
So, wait, how much time have we got?
It's 5:32.
I don't know how long we've been going for. Okay, so rape issues. I did a chapter on rape in my book, chapter 7, and I've quoted statistics and issues all over the world with that topic. But one of the most horrific things that I discovered about that research when I published it, chapter 7, is the men in the government. Men in the government who rape women and children, including in Australia. And there are public cases that I've found, already gone through the courts, already published, that I put in the book. And rape cases of men in the military who rape women in the military, and even men in the police who rape women in the police. Public cases. And how it's gone before the parliament and everything. But you don't see these politicians talking about that. It's very dangerous to have men in the police. It should be 60 to 70% women in the police, and women leadership in the police should be all run by women, so that they can hunt down rapists and murderers, and 99% of them are men. That's just the facts. That's just the way it is, and it's always been like that. And it will never stop unless we put women in charge of the police and even the military to protect women and children and stop men from harming women and children in these really bad ways. There's only a 1.5% conviction rate for rapists in Australia. Pretty much globally it's the same. And about only 10% of rape and sexual assault is actually reported to the police, because the police are full of men. They don't give a shit about women. And that's how also about 70 women a year in Australia get murdered by men because of men in the government. It's their fault. It's the fault of men in the police and fault of the male judges and male politicians, because they allow it. They don't stand there and stop men from killing 70 women a year, and that's their fault. They don't talk about that. And that's because you have to have women in power, women in those places and positions to stop it. They'll stop it. Women are much more likely to stop it, especially women police and women in the military and the police should work together to hunt down these men. Do you know what? There's academics in Australia, which I wrote about in my brilliant book, in chapter 7, and I can't remember the lecturer's name, but he's in an Australian university. He's a man, professor, and his team did a research on Australia And also they did the same similar research in the United States and in the United Kingdom. And they surveyed online men who use the internet, and they asked questions about their sexual activities and their sexual interests. And they published this in university studies, and what they found was 10% of men in Australia, a frightening number, 10% of men in Australia, and the same was in the United States and the United Kingdom, said that they would have sex with a child if they could get away with it, if nobody knew or found out, or if nobody knew or found out, or would not get punished for it. Those were the three things. That 10% of men in Australia and these other nations would have sex with a child if they didn't get caught, if they didn't get found out, if they didn't get prosecuted, or if nobody knew about it. Now you might think, well, 10% is not, this is published by a man in the university, professor, I read about it in the book. You might think 10%, oh, that's not that many, 10%, that's a minority of men, oh, it's just a few men and all that. But if you're talking about 10% of men in Australia, that's 1 million men. You're talking about 10% men in the United States, that's something like 30 million men. So let's just stick to Australia. 10% of men in Australia online, and they knew what the study was about, they knew it was anonymous, and they knew all that sort of thing. They admitted, that's just the ones that admitted it. They admitted it in this university study. 10% of men in Australia is 1 million men. 1 million men in this country admitted from online surveys by a university that they would have sex with a child if nobody found out about it. That is absolutely frightening. And we need federal police and state police, a special division just for that, to catch men who are preying on little children, innocent, defenseless children, vulnerable children, preying on them online or preying on them. Most research says that a man who sexually abuses a child is a relative of the family or a friend of the family or someone that is known to the family. And online, when they're grooming children on Snapchat and all these other horrific, so keep your children off the internet. Keep your children off the internet. Unless they're doing some sort of educational, supervised educational activity, you need to keep your children off the internet. It's not safe. So these men are predators, and they are getting children, and they're basically, it's just a horror story. We need a police service especially for that. We need a police division, a rape police division, and fill it with women, and they can hunt down these online predators, these men on the internet, and men who are grooming children, innocent, defenseless children, and they need to be caught and stopped and locked up, because you cannot protect women and children from these violent, dangerous men. We're talking about men who are really dangerous. You know, when they have that sex slave trade, and I've got a chapter on that in my book too, and all this horrific stuff they do when they sexual slavery of children and women, and they make big, big money, multi-billion-dollar profits from that sort of horrific thing going on in Europe and Asia and Africa and Australia, probably got some connection, and the United States. That is a big, big problem, because they've got big money, you know, and you've got to have the police devoted to, even the military, devoted to finding these dangerous men and prosecuting these men and shutting down these organisations. Any sort of website that has sexualised activity, anything sexual on the internet should be shut down. Because you've got the exploitation of women and children. Everything on the internet sexual should be shut down. You don't know if that woman's been stolen, kidnapped, and put in there by force, and she's been raped for profit, because that's what prostitution is. It's rape for profit, and men are the world's biggest whores. Actually, I proved that in my book. Then they go and exploit and rape women and children for money. If you do that for money, you're just a rapist. Everything sexual on the internet should be banned. And any sort of organisation, and the law should be tough on these people. You're running some sort of brothel and all that. And they say, oh, equal rights, you know, we've got the right to work. That's not work. Sex work is not work. It's degrading to women. It's degrading to children. It's degrading, and what it does, it brings down the way that men treat women. It degrades the way that men treat women if you allow prostitution and those sorts of things. It makes men think women are crap and they treat them badly and they'll exploit them and use violence and all sorts of stuff, and that's bad news for all women, okay? They will view women much worse when you allow that sort of thing. It should be in the law. You try and use a building or a brothel, I think you should be prosecuted, whether it's done by men or women. You've got these so-called madams or whatever, they run these prostitution centres, they should be charged as well in jail. And force prostitutes into, or women who are forced into prostitution into rehabilitation centres and all this sort of thing, and they should be given a job, or even druggies and all that. They should be don't put them in prison, put them in a rehabilitation centre so they can clean themselves up, and they're given a job. Create jobs, special jobs for the homeless and for the druggies and all that, and everybody should work. You've got a lot of hard-working people in Australia and around the world, all the business people and the working people working very hard every day, and you've got these people, 3 million, 4 million, 5 million people sitting on the dole. That's wrong. That's wrong. People will have purpose and meaning when you create jobs and business opportunities for people and force people to work. They can get a house, they can get a girlfriend or a boyfriend, they can have a family, and they need to be able to have some hope and purpose too. But we have to create jobs for people, not cut people off. We have to say, my economic vision, I create 600,000 jobs a year. And then everybody's got a job, or you get a job, and you say, here's 3 jobs, pick a job, and help people, really help people, and encourage people and support people. And of course people are going to make mistakes, they're not perfect, no one's perfect, not even St. Teresa. But people will make mistakes, and they need encouragement, and they need skills, education and training, and they need encouragement, and they need a job. How much time have we got left? I don't know how long we've gone for.
You want to talk?
It's 5:42 now.
I had some other issues I was going to talk about, but I'm going to hand it over now to Davina. Davina wants to talk for a little while on this live stream, and I said, yeah, no worries, Davina. She's in Sydney and some of her friends. And I'm going to talk about the court system. Just one thing quickly, that the judges, who the hell created a court system where you got one up the front? What a ridiculous system. They do that in the United States, in Europe, in Asia, Africa, Australia, everywhere. Who the hell has got a right to sit up the front and judge thousands and thousands of people? They make mistakes. It's not fair on the judges and the magistrates either. You've got to have 3 up the front and a lawyer on each side. And the police are called as witnesses or give evidence. They don't get to sit there in the magistrate's court. They're not a lawyer. That's a terrible, terrible judicial system. And I've got no idea how people have allowed that to go on for centuries, but you've got to have 3 up the front. 3 up the front in court so they can make a proper decision. It's not fair on the judge either to have 1 up the front, or the people. They can make some serious decisions affecting thousands of people's lives, and it's just wrong. It's just a stupid way to run a court. Don't call it a court. You're not going to run it with lawyers either. And that's all got to change. It should have changed years ago. It's just stupid men in power, and they make all these stupid practices up, and then, there's all this injustice goes on. Anyway, I'm going to hand you over to Davina now. God bless everyone.
Thank you, Teresa. In order to create change, we need to gain awareness. We need people like Teresa speaking out. I encourage all of our community in Australia to really listen to the issues that Teresa has in her book. She is an amazing, real Australian. There's many people born in Australia that don't have Australian values. we are all about free speech. The supposed the lucky country, yes. But there's many things that we need to gain a better awareness of. And Teresa has written a book extensively about the most important issues that us Australians are facing in today's day and age. Believe it or not, the stolen generation never ended, it just changed form. I'm a victim of this. I'm in Teresa's book as well. Very much appreciatively for the forced antipsychotic drugging, which kills people by the thousands each year. And the current form of the forced stolen generation. If parents have pedophiles and child abusers, absolutely, but charge the parents. There's got to be criminal convictions. There's got to be evidence. But if a parent makes a mistake, like has a drink in the house, and they were still acting normally, or there's they stole my baby's one first at birth 18 years ago, and the second one at 1 month 2 years ago, for the possible risk of future harm, because I've been misdiagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. I can explain how I've been misdiagnosed, and leading me to the awareness that I can't be the only one. And I've also seen many others who have been misdiagnosed based on friend groups within psychiatry that have gathered evidence which seems to be a certain way, but in all reality they didn't ask the person questions as to why they were behaving that way. They didn't analyse correctly as to why things occurred and looked to seem in a certain way. But even if we weren't misdiagnosed, I still believe that forced antipsychotic drugging is absolutely abhorrent. But even someone who does have schizophrenia, for example, especially with the way it kills us all, the side effects make us so sick. We sleep for 20 hours, we can't function. It's just absolutely abnormal and disgusting. This is not just happening to me, but many people in Australia, and I'd like there to be an awareness of this. I thank Teresa very much. I encourage everyone to buy her book. She has done extensive research on many people in our Australian community, and she's gathered all the evidence necessary for people, to bring about this awareness. So I encourage everyone to buy her book. I'm in chapter 10. My story's in chapter 10. It's only brief, and I'm hoping to write a book too, based on being inspired by Teresa. She's a real Australian. I thank you all for listening to Teresa. She's very wise and educated. And also, thank you for hearing me. Let's create a change in Australia for today. Let's see the abolition of the forced antipsychotic industry, where we're being injected with heavy, dangerous, debilitating drugs that are killing us. With the side effects are too much. We're Australia. Things like this shouldn't be by force. We're not in Nazi Germany. We're not in the olden days stolen generation, but these things are occurring today still. So it needs to be listened to and cared about. So I encourage everyone to buy Political Persecution Against Women and Children World by Teresa Van Lieshout. I'm in my story is in chapter 10. And as I said, she goes on extensively about the truth that all Australians need to know. and care about and realise in order to create a change for the betterment of all Australians equally in society today. Teresa Van Leeshout, Persecution Against Women and Children World. Thank you, Teresa. We love you. You're amazing. Thank you.
Stop now. Now we're seeing the next speech is between here and Melbourne somewhere. So I'm going to speak a couple of times between here and Melbourne on the way back to Melbourne, and then over to Adelaide, Perth, up to Broome, Darwin, back to Adelaide, and then up to Brisbane over the next 6 months. So we're going to make lots of speeches, lots of information, and remember that campaign, the public campaign during the federal election this year for Australians to vote for your Governor-General from a list of candidates, because that position needs to be chosen by the Australian people, and it should have been like that from the start. It should have been like that from the beginning. Why didn't they make it like that? The Federal Executive Council, and under the Constitution, the Federal Executive Council should be voted by the public as well. That's the Constitution. It's 30 politicians in the Federal Executive Council works for the Governor-General, and Council, and that's the way it's written. Why have they changed it? Why have they don't run it the way that it's written? It's weird. Very weird. Very corrupt.